Now, an example of dry fruits, you have peas, you have some nuts as well. When you think of these things, initially you might say to yourself, you might associate, I guess, peas with being vegetables. But remember, my original definition of a fruit is that this is just the seed-bearing part of a plant that would have developed from the ovary. Okay, so some vegetables, such as, a tomato, uh, is also considered a fruit. Okay, so anything that has a seed inside of it, we actually refer to them as fruits. Now, going back to the dry fruits, you have two types. You have dehiscent dry fruits and you have indehiscent dry fruits. The only difference between them is that with the dehiscent dry fruits, once these fruits are completely dry, the whatever once these fruits are completely dry, it's going to split open and that's going to release the seeds inside of it. Okay, so this is going to help the seed to spread. This is an example of mechanical dispersal. Okay, so by the seed or by the fruit physically splitting, that's going to help the seeds to basically spread out. Now, an example of this is I guess, a pea pod. If you've seen I guess, a pigeon pea tree before, you'll notice that once those pods on that tree dries out, the pod is going to split, and that's going to help seeds to basically spread out. Okay, now with the indehiscent fruits, these are also dry fruits, but once they are dry, they're not going to split. An example of this is an acorn. Okay, all right, so here are some other indehiscent fruits. You also have a dandelion. Okay, whenever you blow a dandelion and you see those little spores that fly out, that's actually the seed. Okay, the fruit of the dandelion would basically be the feathery part. But like I said, with indehiscent fruits, these ones are not necessarily going to be edible. Not all of them might be edible. So the dandelion is an example of an indehiscent fruit that's not edible. The actual fruit part of the dandelion is not, edible, but there's a seed attached to it, and the fruit is designed in a way that it's going to make the pod, I guess, feathery, so that it can travel along the wind. Okay, so here's a picture that basically just shows, a succulent fruit using animal dispersal to help it to spread its seed. You have a bird that's eating a papaya, and if this bird accidentally eats one of these seeds, whenever it poops out the seed, that seed will now be able to grow wherever that lands. This is an example of water dispersal. Uh, this specifically is showing a picture of a coconut. Now, coconuts are very buoyant, which means, once it falls inside the water, it can float for hundreds of miles, maybe even thousands of miles. So this is why, you know, I guess when it comes to deserted islands, you'll always find some type of coconut tree or maybe even a palm tree there, because these types of plants, they spread their seeds by using the water. So if these coconuts get into the water, they're just going to float until they land on some type of soil, which can be an island somewhere, and they'll basically start growing. So this is why you find a lot of coconut trees, natively living on islands, because they're going to utilize this water dispersal to help them to travel or to help it to spread its seed. Okay, this is another example of mechanical dispersal. Remember when I was telling you guys about the dehiscent fruits, uh, which means that once this fruit is dry or fully matured, whenever it drops to the ground, it's going to split. Or it might be a scenario where the sun is going to dry the pea pod, dry the fruit, and that's going to cause the seeds to disperse. Okay, so whenever these fruits split, that's going to, generate some type of motion, and that's going to help the seeds to spread out. And next you have wind dispersal. So once again, this is showing a picture of a dandelion. Whenever you know the wind blows this dandelion, it's going to spread out all of these fruits. Now this is an indehiscent fruit because you know it's a dry fruit, but it cannot split. Okay, with this fruit here, it's relying on the wind to basically help it to spread out. And if you take a closer look at this picture here, you see the fruit part of it, which is basically, you know, this feathery light part of it. It's not edible, but I guess it's adapted itself to basically traveling in the wind. So that's why it's going to be very light and feathery. And at the end of this fruit here, you see the seed. So once the wind blows this seed someplace, it's going to basically grow. Okay, so that's it for this video here. I'll also answer a few questions for you guys that you can use, you know, for practice. But if you want me to give you more questions, because I do have more questions on this video here, you could just message me and we'll go through all of these questions together, you know, in a live class session. Okay, so the first one I'll answer here. This questionnaire basically shows pollination as well as fertilization. Okay, so if you want to, you can pause the video here and you can attempt to answer some of these questions. And then I'll basically, you know, give you the answer for the question. Okay, so with this first questionnaire, name and define the process taking place at X and Y. At X, this is called pollination because you have a pollen grain that travels from this stamen over here and it lands on the pistil over here. That's called pollination. So there's the name of the process as well as the definition. Next, you have fertilization, okay? Definition of fertilization, this is the union of a male gamete and a female gamete cell, and that's going to create a embryo, or you can say a zygote. Okay, so that's the name of the process as well as a definition for fertilization. The union of a female and a male gamete cell, which creates an embryo, or you could say a zygote in the process. Suggest why process Y may not take place if a pollen grain from a different species was involved in process X. Well, for one, you know, if a pollen grain from a different species was to land on the wrong species, because these plants are different species, well, members of different species, they cannot reproduce with one another. Okay, the reason why they can't reproduce is because they're gonna have different DNA. They're also gonna have different chromosomes from one another. So no fertilization is going to take place. Now for C, explain how the flower of a Bauhinia species is different from that in grasses. Okay, with this question here, the flower from the Bauhinia species, they are insect pollinated plants. Okay, the flowers that you find in grass, they're usually going to be wind pollinated. Okay, so in my previous videos, I would have talked about how, you know, insect pollinated plants are different from wind pollinated plants. For example, with insect pollinated plants, their flowers are going to be conspicuous, which means that it's noticeable. It's going to be large and it's going to have some type of vibrant color. In addition to that, the pollen grains from this flower, they're going to be very sticky because with insect pollinated plants, they're trying to attract insects to them by having nectar. And once these bugs come close to the flower, the pollen grain is going to stick to the bugs, which is why they're going to be sticky. So those are two differences between Bauhinia and grasses. Now with the flowers on grasses, these are going to be inconspicuous, which means that they're not going to be noticeable. They're not going to have some type of vibrant color. In most cases, you know, they might be green. Okay, they may not even look like a typical flower because usually when you think of grass, the last thing you think about is a flower. You just think of something that's green and that's on the ground. So with the flowers on, grass species of plants, they are not noticeable. And also, you'll find that the stigma is going to be feathery, which means that it's basically going to have some type of, uh, I guess, feathery structure on it that's going to help it to catch small pollen grain out of the wind. Okay, so with the pollen grain from these, from the grasses, you will expect them to be very small and very smooth so that they can easily, blow into the air. You may not necessarily be able to see them, but they're still in the air. So this is why for, I guess, people who have allergies, one of their triggers for allergies might be pollen. The pollen spores are basically inside the air. You might not necessarily be able to see them. Okay, so that's another way that you will expect the flower on grasses to be different. You have their pollen grains being very small and smooth, making them aerodynamic so that they can travel through the wind. You also have that they will have a feathery stigma. Now I do have a picture that shows this. Let me go back to the beginning. Where is that? Okay, so here's a picture. Okay, so here's a picture that shows the flowers that you would typically find on a grass or on some grass. Okay, so with this one here, these yellow things that you see, these are actually the anthers that are going to help to spread the pollen grain. So these are not, petals. Okay, the petals on this flower is not noticeable. You just could just see, green, basically structures on it. You don't even see any petals. It just looks like a green leaf-like structure. Okay, here's a closer up picture over here. This right here, this is the stigma. Okay, this is what I mean by saying, they have a feathery design. Okay, so right here, this is a close-up picture of those same, yellow anthers that would have talked about in this picture over here. Okay, so these anthers are basically releasing pollen grains. And this stigma here has a feather-like structure. So this is going to help it to basically filter the wind as it passes it, and those pollen grains will now land on the stigma, and that's how this grass plant is going to do sexual reproduction. So even though, it doesn't have a typical flower, it still has a flower-like structure on it that's going to help it to do sexual reproduction. Okay, so that's it for this questionnaire. I'll do another one. And then, like I said, if you want more questions, because I have several here, you can just message me and I'll go through all of these questions with you. All right, name the part marked A, B, and C. Well, with this question here, this is just a general question on, plants. Well, sexual reproduction of plants and all, but it might not necessarily just be fertilization. Okay, so part A, that's the stigma. Part B, this is the anther. And part C, that is the ovary. State the two features shown in the diagram which suggests that it is an insect pollinated flower. Now with this here, you can see that the flowers are very large. The petals are very large, which you would typically find in insect pollinated plants because they're gonna have large flowers in order to attract different insects. Okay, another thing that shows you that this is an insect pollinated flower is that you find the anther and the stigma inside of the flower petals. Okay, the reason why they're inside is because this plant is basically trying to put the anther and the stigma in the path of an insect that's trying to get into the flower petals so that it can find nectar. This question also says, state two other features of an insect pollinated flower not shown in the diagram. Okay, what's not shown in the diagram, I guess you can say color, because you know this is a black and white picture. And like I said, that's one of the features you would find inside an insect pollinated plant. It's going to have, the petals are going to have a vibrant color. Another thing you can say is that the anther or the stamen are usually going to be very short inside of insect pollinated flowers. Okay, so that's another feature that you can say that is not shown inside this diagram. Next, the next question says, name the structure that will become the fruit and the seed. The ovary is going to become the fruit, and the ovules are going to become the seed. The next question says, how many pollen grains would be needed to fertilize the female gametes in this flower? Now, in order to answer this question, the only thing you need to know is that for each ovule, you'll need a pollen grain to fertilize it so that it'll become a seed. Okay, because each pollen grain that lands on the stigma, they're each going to have one pollen tube, and that's only going to carry one male nuclei or male gamete inside of it. Okay, so for this picture specifically, that means that, all right, you can't, this isn't a clear picture because I had to take a picture of this and put it on my laptop. But let's say there were 6 ovules inside of this, then that means you would need 6 pollen grains to fully fertilize each one of those ovules. Okay, so now with some plants, you know, they're going to be a little bit different. You know, some fruits only have 1 seed inside of them, which means that that flower would have had, you know, 1 ovule inside of it, and that would have grown into a fruit. For example, a mango. You know, with other fruits, sometimes the fruits might have multiple seeds inside of it, like an apple. An apple is going to have maybe 4 seeds inside of it. Each one of those seeds were originally an ovule, but in order for those ovules to become a mature seed that has the potential of growing into another plant, each one of those ovules are going to need a pollen grain. You also have pea pods or the pigeon pea. If you look at a pea pod, you will find, you know, it has maybe 5 different seeds inside of it in each pod. So each one of those ovules, once again, would have had to been pollinated from, well, a pollen grain, okay? Because one pollen tube is going to grow from each pollen grain, and that's going to fertilize each ovule. Okay, so that's it for this video here. And like I said, if you want more questions, you know, on this same general topic, you can ask me to, well, you can just message me and we'll go through these questions, or I can even email you this PowerPoint so that you can, you know, use these questions to practice.